Hey guys, welcome to this video. Thanks for tuning in and sharing in this now moment with myself and with one another. If you haven't seen these videos before, welcome and welcome back if you have. My intention is unity and oneness and the highest levels of love light. I already kind of just set my intention to dip into that frequency, connecting in with my oversoul and highest aspect, right? Which we are all connected to. We have this idea that there's these versions of us that are kind of spread out everywhere. And that is true from one perspective, but that's why it's so important to kind of call us into centeredness and collect back our frequencies and energies that we may have been spreading out over dimensions and time streams, right? Because we are multidimensional beings, yet we are not necessarily meant to be in these dimensions. Like, we're here on Earth as a multidimensional being, able to access these other dimensions. But obviously, to have a conversation with someone who is sharing this dimensional experience with us, we have to hone in and not be split in all of these different networks and areas and aspects. That can be challenging at times. So I felt like it was important to mention that, because a lot of us are tapping and tuning into these other aspects, these other layers, these other gifts that are opening for us. And it's difficult to really stay centered, as well as continually processing the human experience, the memories that are bringing up triggers of essences of who we were perhaps as a teenager, or a past relationship that's coming up for us to review and recognize that how much we've grown from, or recognize some of the things that maybe we haven't looked at in a long time. So that's something else that's been coming up this last week as a recap. I'll give a little recap and maybe go into projection of this week's energies. Essentially, a lot of little miniature circumstances were presented to me through conversations, through sessions, through interacting with just other humans. And what I recognized was there was a lot of projection going on, not only on my own part. The things that that came up that I was invited to ask is that my ego? Is that something I still need to hang on to? Do I need to hang on to being right in this now moment? Can I let go of this concept that other person has of me? Do I need to, in this moment, set my boundaries, or am I just projecting? So it's basically letting go of the need for others. Sometimes others need to have whatever they need to have. And it might be an idea of who we are. So I'm going to give an example. How often do we have a friend, a childhood friend? We get together and that childhood friend is locked into those childhood ideas of who you were. And you're not that person anymore. You may not be the same person you were a year ago. And so what happens is that person, place, thing triggers within you this memory of who you were at that time. They may not even recognize that that's what they're doing. Some people need to hold on to that concept of who you were so that they can better understand their role. Sometimes they need to do that for their own ego, whatever it may be. So there comes a time sometimes where we have to speak up, speak our truth, and say, I really am grateful that you have all those awesome, those memories. Those memories aren't that awesome for me. I don't remember them the same way that you do. So I'd really like to just kind of move forward and talk about who we are now. And sometimes that's necessary in order to create those healthy boundaries, in order not to get sucked into their version of their reality of who they think you are when it no longer is applicable. Sometimes, though, it isn't necessary. And we have to ask ourselves, do I need to correct this person because my memory and recollection is not the same as their memory and recollection? And sometimes it's not necessary. Sometimes we let them have it, so to speak, meaning you can hang on to that. If that's what you think really happened, then maybe that's something that was shown to me to give me the opportunity to give that to you. Not that we're giving them anything. We're just giving them the opportunity to see things from their perspective. Whether or not that perspective is 100% accurate or not is it really that important for us to make those corrections based on a past memory or recollection that is no longer real for us, although it may be real for them? I know that was kind of confusing, but does that make sense? So it's just recognizing that there are people who are going to project certain memories on us of who they think we are, who they think we should be, who they think we should be representing, how we should be acting, so on and so forth. Because in their reality, that's what they believe. Or perhaps that was what happened in their memory box. So it's stored within there. They've now attached a feeling or associated around this idea of who you are, or a conversation that you may or may not have had. And now they have created something around that. So we could correct them all day long, but it isn't necessarily going to make it the way we think it should, right? So it's flip-flop, flip-flop, flip-flop. Okay, so being aware that sometimes it isn't necessary for us to adjust their screen. It isn't necessarily necessary for us to adjust their lens of perception, even when it involves us. How many times if you've had a sibling and you have an argument, I gotta use my fan here to get rid of it. One little bug that just really likes to hang out here in those little plant gnats. Anyways, oh, there he is. I'm trying not to. Anyways, so you have a sibling and you get into an argument, and here 10 years later, you remember the argument and they remember it, and it's not even like it was the same argument. It's kind of like you get that feeling of, did that even happen? That isn't even the way it happened. And here's how I know my side is real and you are not correct. And it's amazing though, how sometimes you can still have that conversation and they still don't see it that way. So it's kind of getting to that space. I had a lot of opportunities for me to just say, let that one go. And did that trigger a connection to who I might have been at that time for me to heal or for me to let go of? Because sometimes we were not necessarily the same people. Let's say you were a partier when you were in your 20s, and you may not be proud of some of the choices that you made. And somebody says, oh, remember that time when we went to that party? And you're like, oh, do you really have to bring that up? So the question becomes, is it necessary for me to say, I do remember that, but it's not something I like to focus on? And it can give us the opportunity to maybe make that other person aware of the fact that you're not living in that reality anymore. They can live in that reality, but that's not who you are anymore. Or it could be an opportunity for you to go, yep, I do remember that. And ask ourselves if we're holding on to any self guilt associated with that, or did we forgive ourselves for getting drunk and passing out at the party and making an idiot out of ourselves? I'm using that as an example because sometimes we're still hanging on to those things, and now we have this opportunity that everything is coming up. I did a video called Everything is Coming Up, and that's an example. Things we thought we processed or things we thought we let go of are being presented to us by other people's projections of us. And it's very interesting. I had that come up for me quite a few times this week. I had to let go of that other person's expectations of how I should be interacting or handling a situation in my life. I had to let go of their judgment of my behavior. I had to let go of a particular memory that I didn't feel was the way it really happened, but they strongly did. And I had to just let them be in that space. As long as it's not hurting me or hurting them, it really became irrelevant. And I had to get into a place of neutrality and say, okay, it's not really okay. And that's kind of what I think a lot of times we're learning too, micro to macro, is it worth having a conversation with a particular person who we'd like to agree with us on a particular subject matter. But if that person is still living in 1985, are they really going to see things for how they are now? I'm using that as an example, right? And there's different layers. Some people are still living in their childhood. Some people are still stuck in their teens. Some people haven't forgiven their parents. Some people haven't forgiven us. So we really have to come into that recognition that that's something that they need to work through as well. And it may not be our responsibility to point out to them what they need to work on, even when it comes to us, unless it's something that we really feel is important to us and isn't ego driven. So for example, I had to ask myself, is it my ego that wants to correct this person on a particular memory that they now have that isn't how I remember it happening? Not necessary. Boom, gone, dissolved, right? Although it took me a little bit to dissolve that and recognize that if it were necessary, I could then say, you know, I don't feel that that's the way that it happened. And I understand though how you could see that that is maybe how you remember it. So there's sometimes just different ways of looking at things, and we are being invited to ask ourselves, how can I most fluidly, from my heart and openly, authentically show up, ask, communicate, and speak beyond this idea or concept of what I have of them and they have of me. I mean, it's really anything is going to come up right now. And that was one of them. Anywhere that we have unresolved trauma or unresolved guilt or not been in a place of true acceptance, it's going to show up. And that was just a little small example from my week. The energies this week were extremely volatile on some days, and other days, I guess some of the words that would come up, my friend Jess used the word crunchy. I think that was pretty accurate. She had said that the planets were squaring off. And I'm not a huge astrology person, although I enjoy watching astrology videos, especially because sometimes it can help validate how we're feeling. And whenever I think of planets squaring off, I think of like squaring off to face each other, to line up so that we can kind of see what we need to square off with. And essentially, I felt like it was hard edges. So it was edgy. And that was what I was feeling, quite a bit of anger, edginess, just kind of, you know, squaring off, like, where do I need to move? What do I need to do? What's going on right now? Which can also be associated with a lot of heightened solar activity and earth activity. If we're not finding our place of just clearing and being in water and detoxifying, literally, it can get overwhelming at times with that edginess, meaning once you kind of acknowledge and recognize that you're feeling that way, it's less likely to get out of control to where it's harder to manage. Does that make sense? So for example, I might feel, it's edgy day, got some stuff that's being stirred up. Maybe it's not a good idea for me to have lunch with that family member or friend or coworker that always likes to stir the pot. Maybe I should postpone that until I can feel just a little bit more settled with myself. Other times, now's the time to address that situation, back to what I was talking about earlier, that really I feel I'm tired of that person's projection of who they think I should be, how they think I should behave. We could just say, let's agree to disagree. Can we talk about who we are now and not really worry about changing each other? And sometimes it just takes having that honest conversation where the other person can go, I'm sorry, I didn't know you felt that way. Nothing to be sorry over. I just want to have an honest conversation and just really enjoy each other's company. Sometimes that can give us the little power that we need to stand up for ourselves or speak our truths. Other times, though, if we're not able to find that balance and stability in our own selves, then we end up projecting our fears, feelings, guilt, shame, blame on the other person, or we end up agreeing to that and giving in and saying something that maybe isn't true, like, oh yeah, that is how it happened, when it isn't, for example. So we're really seeing it from all angles, or being invited to see things from all angles. Okay, this week, I'm just going to go into a little flow. I feel like what's happened is the energies were kind of in a lull, and that those energies, when we're in that lull, some of us have been on such edge. Things have felt so edgy, crunchy, squaring off, that we're almost afraid to relax, because as soon as we relax, the next wave comes. And we're like, dang it, I just got into the flow. I just felt like we were going to get a break. And then here it is again. Some of us are feeling like we haven't gotten a break and we're still in it. Everybody's in their different stages, but energetically, the stage that I feel today is it's a little bit of that calm before the storm. I felt that yesterday, today, and I do feel like this kind of happens right before we get another layer of ramping up. But this is, we as a collective have seemed to have chosen this particular way of going about things, because from my perspective, it speeds things up. It makes things more obvious. It makes things more edgy so that we can really, really see them and they're not as hidden, right? The question becomes, how do we, so it is about community though, and it is about being able to come together and have honest conversations without that edginess setting us off and putting us just into subconscious programming. So the question becomes, are we talking to the program, or are we just able to integrate and process in such a way that we're not communicating with someone else's program? So it's recognizing when we are, so that we can back off. It's recognizing when someone else is triggering our programs, so that we can deprogram those old scenarios, so that we can reprogram and shift everything into this next level of spaciousness that we have access to, yet we're still breaking down old paradigms so that we can fully and consciously move into that next level and stage of awareness. Okay, so that was a little bit of an energy update. So I'm going to just kind of go into this flow and see where it goes. And what I'm kind of tuning into right now is that many of us are processing a lot of stuff still from last week. This can feel like we're at a standstill, and I'm just in flow right now. I do different flows. Sometimes it's poems, sometimes it's light language. This is more of a real, like usable, although it's all usable on different layers and levels, right? So essentially, many of us are accessing these deeper potentials and these different frequencies and bandwidths. We're still, I'm hearing, on edge of the next precipice. So for some of us, it feels like time stands still. For some of us, we feel like time is speeding up. Some of us, we want time to speed up because okay. So what I'm seeing is essentially many of us have felt like we really just took 2 steps back. And I was shown this the other day. I've been shown this quite a few times. If you look at, let's say, 2 ladders, I might have said this in a previous video, and you're on these 2 separate tracks. We had to backtrack to jump onto this track in order to collect certain things that we would have otherwise overlooked or left behind. So that's part of the reason some of us are feeling the way that we're feeling, myself included. It felt like we were on this fast track and then all of a sudden, the brakes came on. Now what I'm kind of hearing is we're pumping the brakes. So it's almost like stop, go, stop, go, stop, go, pumping the brakes in order to then just let us slingshot to the next stage of development. So there are many developments that are unfolding right now in the collective, and those developments will create a lack of security for some. Surprise, surprise. This is not meant to be explained lightly, for security is the very foundational principle of our human existence. We love to feel secure and stable. Yet in these times of instability, part of the reason we feel this is because Earth has shifted. The location of where we are is different, and our own homing devices are off. So I'm kind of being shown a compass that's in water, and it's like, whoa, where am I? I don't know which direction this is. Is this up or is this down? Is this north or is this south? And some of us are just spinning like we're in the Bermuda Triangle, and we just are really having difficulty honing in. I'm seeing a pigeon, right? Finding our sense of stability. Security is part of that, but it's the stability. And some of us feel like we are gaining traction, but others, most of the collective feels like they've lost a little traction. We think we're taking, it's 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. I said this the other day to a friend of mine. It's, what is that, Paula Abdul? 2 steps forward, I'll take 2 steps back. We come together because opposites attract. So this was what the message was coming through, is that there's some major shift going on, and it's literally this opposite attraction that's causing this frequency to feel very foreign to us. It's not something we're used to dabbling in on a regular basis. And I'm just in flow. So I'm just letting these messages come through. Many of us are witnessing anomalies in the facade. Many of us are seeing these huge gaps within the, I'm hearing docking systems. A lot of these gaps are openings in frequency patterns and nets from one perspective. And when we see into and we peer through these open dominions, it actually gives us this feeling of instability, because what I'm being shown is that people are seeing through this, they're seeing through it. And maybe it's only happening in short bursts, but it's happening almost on a subconscious level for a lot of people. So it's like that. I'm being shown Fight Club. All right, so in the movie Fight Club, there's when they splice these different pieces of movies, and you're like, what was that? What did I just see? It's a great movie, by the way. Wow, that's being shown to me as a major example of what's going on right now. Like squaring off to fight ourselves, to fight these, and it's more, and having this split, opposites attract. It's all in the same body, but it's like this split has happened. And I see that it gets worse before it gets better, kind of thing. And then all of a sudden it has to be the complete merge, right? Of recognizing, wow, I'm a human and I'm going to have these levels of emotions, and I have to give myself permission to let go and also to feel upset. And as we stop fighting ourselves and just kind of come back into this space of somewhat stability, not feeling, not getting upset, but just saying, I feel upset right now. I feel like this has triggered something within me. What do I need to do to process this and get back into just a more consistent, harmonious being? You know, it doesn't have to be, it's coherence, right? I talk about that all the time, heart math. It's finding that coherence to where we can stabilize ourselves in this new navigational pull. So our being shown our bodies, let me go back to Fight Club and just end on that note. Project Mayhem, right? We're seeing that. It's becoming, we're seeing these spliced pieces that are overlays, that aren't real, that are just so obvious to some, but others, it's a subconscious thing. It's like subliminal is the word I was looking for. So the subliminal programming essentially has been hacked. And the hackers are actually reprogramming the subliminal programming so that the facade can be, the real information exchange can begin. So all of a sudden, what was not necessarily love and light is really obvious. But then I'm going to call them the light worker hackers, have hacked in and are now rearranging the molecular interaction between these reality systems so that we can have more and more and more authentic experiences. And what I'm hearing is that those authentic experiences, though, may make us feel off kilter, because all of a sudden we're interacting with our reality in a different way than we've ever interacted with it before. And because it's setting off, I'm seeing when you set off an avalanche, like I'm seeing charges, and then pieces of the mountain come down, and all of a sudden it's this avalanche, and we become very aware very quickly of how out of balance things were before, but also how we're exchanging information is different. I have a good friend who's like telepathy is off the charts right now. She's just like so aware of when people are calling, who's calling, what they're going to be talking about. And I'm going to use that as an example because a lot of us are going through that. In the past, we've ignored it as coincidence, but now it's happening so much that it's not ignorable for some. And so this has now become, let's say, I'll use my friend as an example, part of her reality. And she's never operated necessarily in that way with her reality in that way. Does that make sense? So when I started, for example, to open up to the synchronicities and how the universe communicates through the animals, through the clouds, through the television, in all ways, all of a sudden, I began interacting with the universe in a completely different way than I had the week before. And this kind of comes back to what I was saying at the beginning. We're really being invited to let go of the labels that people have given us and what we've given other people, whether they be a light worker, a teacher, a nurse, a doctor, a family member, like just letting go of all these concepts of, oh, that person's a blue ray. Oh, that person's Pleiadian. Oh, well, they're this or they're that. In one reality or subset, that was possibly true. But now, in this new version of our reality, it no longer functions that way. Or we changed timelines. Therefore, what would have been interpreted as a particular reality in the old timeline is no longer applicable because the application of the program has changed. Whew. All right. So I'm being guided just to keep saying the telepathy, or a lot of people, what we're not understanding is this is how our reality is supposed to work. But there's been so much density and so many distractions and loud noises that we haven't heard the deeper hum, the sound behind the sound. We haven't recognized how to tune into our bodies and our environments and recognize that our bodies are a tuning fork to tell us when something isn't right or someone's telling the truth or not telling the truth, so on and so forth. So I use the telepathy as an example, but for some people, it's their bodies. all of a sudden they're like, whoa, why am I feeling this feeling in my gut that doesn't feel good when I'm around this other person? It may not be because it may be because there's, it could be a lot of reasons. Just to keep it really simple, your body's trying to tell you something, and acknowledging that this is, wow, it happens every time I'm around this other person. It may be that your body's trying to tell you this person isn't necessarily for you. Doesn't have to be that they're a bad person or they have ill will. It could be they have an entity attachment. It could be, and I say all this stuff to take it with a grain of salt, because how much we attach, and I'm sharing this because I did this in the beginning, don't overthink it. So I would have all these body sensations, and so I would be around a particular person who I saw as having entities. I could go into a place of fear and judgment and like, ooh, I don't want to be around that person. Okay, got to put up my protection. That's also, that can be accurate, but that can also be based on an old timeline. It can also be based on an old frequency system. So now my body is making me aware that our energies just aren't jiving, whether it be because they are processing some shadow. Well, let's just call that an entity attachment. We create sometimes these entities as protective mechanisms so that we don't have to face or deal with the shadow. So that becomes a living entity that then maybe entities from the astral can attach to, so on and so forth. I could go on and on. That might be fun to talk about in another video, but I'm being guided just to keep it simple and not attached to the idea of what it means, what it looks like, and who the entity is, and what dimension are they from. And that can be useful for some people. For me, that just pulls me off course, and it's not necessary for me to know. But my body's trying to tell me, you guys just aren't jiving. So I recognize that maybe this is not the person I need to be around right now. Or they might be processing something and it isn't for me to know unless they ask me. And then that would be another layer. So does that make sense? We're all having these things turn on for us. The less we attach ourselves to what it is, the easier it is to open to all of it. So I used to go, okay, give me a yes, give me a no. Yes meant, oh, that's how my body felt. And no felt heavy. Sometimes it felt like my gut clenching. Sometimes it felt like yes was my head getting tingly. But I began to recognize that the answers didn't have to just come that way. And sometimes the answers are misinterpreted because our body is tuning into something else. So it is about us learning that type of communication, learning how to interact in this new world, and using our discernment. And the more we can come back to the stability of being centered and not being all over the place, the easier it is for us to learn how to interact with these new abilities. Because if we're picking up telepathically on somebody else and we're not setting up our boundaries, then it can be distracting, overwhelming, confusing, freaky, misinterpreted to then become freaky. And also recognizing that it's our responsibility not to tune into somebody else's stuff if that's not something that we have permission to do. But on the flip side, we're all tuning into each other's stuff because we're all sharing in these bubbles. So it's inevitable that when we open up, we're going to feel things that maybe is going on in somebody else's body. Maybe in that moment, we have the opportunity to ask, would you mind if I sent you a little healing energy? They may really feel grateful that you're offering. They may not have known. But that can also freak other people out. When you do that, say, hey, I feel like you might have a little entity attachment over there on your shoulder. Do you mind if I help you get rid of it? That may not be that's where we want to use discernment. because my version of what an entity looks like and their idea of what an entity might be are two different things. Again, going back to what I said in the beginning, projecting what that means to them, it may mean something different to them than it does to us. And so being aware that as other people open to these things, they can sometimes be in a place of fear still. So it comes back to us fine-tuning our own abilities, our own discernment, our own instruments, and recognizing, being responsible with the energies. And I've learned this from experience, and it could be, we could call it learning from our mistakes. I don't necessarily see them as mistakes, although I have and still do from time to time make choices that I realize looking back on it, I could have been maybe handled in a more expansive way had I have been more centered and followed my own advice, right? In that moment. But it became a valuable experience for me to not only learn how not to do things in the future, but also maybe I was able to then process certain emotions that were attached with the way that I misinterpreted or mishandled or could have handled things in a better way, right? So perhaps that was something, there was a nugget in there for me to really be able to feel into. It could be disappointment in myself. What does that feel like? Ooh, I don't like that. I remember when you were disappointed. Okay, let's not do this again. And let's recognize that there was disappointment or guilt or shame or blame, because that's a very human experience. And then I had the ability, because of that mistake, to be compassionate with myself and to apologize and own up, right? Which then gives me an opportunity to work through the ego of thinking I was right when maybe I wasn't. So there's so many layers, guys, and it's so exciting from that perspective, as frustrating as it can be, to learn how to acclimate to these new energies. I also did a video called Acclimating to the New Energies, or Acclimating to the Climate Change. When I use those words, that's a trigger. I'm not speaking about the linear planetary changes that are being projected. I'm speaking of our inner climate, our energetic climates, and our reality that we exist within. So we're learning how to navigate these, and we can feel, from my perspective, very childish at times, like, not, even though we're mastery, we're here to be masters and embodiments of source. And sometimes I just feel like a little kid who doesn't know where I'm headed, and that, or a teenager that's feeling petulant, right? That's a big thing that's been coming up for a lot of people. But recognizing that, because part of this it is about the journey. So it's feeling all of this so that we can have that vulnerability that gives us the opportunity to grow from that. And that can be a beautiful gift, feeling vulnerable and being able to share that with others. So not stopping other people either from expressing their own vulnerabilities, yet learning how to not feed a victim. There's a difference between being vulnerable and being a victim. So there's all these different, I mean, it's so much, right? So you guys, this isn't for wimps, that's for sure. The energy's coming up. So I think I'm going to end on that note and maybe go into a little flow in video too. So thanks for tuning in to this energy update, and me sharing my own experiences. I will also share Corvid, the gift that keeps on giving. I have lost a ton of hair. How about you guys? I'm finding that that's a thing. So I just want to share, for those of you who have experienced the wonderful gift of Corvid and survived, I don't say that lightly, by the way. I did a whole video on Corvid. I invite you to check that out if you feel guided. I also uploaded on my website a Corvid recording with light language to connect in with the virus, by the way. I wanted to share that because when I had it, I was guided to do that. And so I've channeled, if you want to call it that, light language and frequencies, essentially to integrate and connect with it on an energetic level. So I did upload that on my website if you're interested in downloading that in MP3 format. What else? Oh, the gift that keeps on giving. So I don't say this lightly. It's the worst thing I've ever had. And people haven't survived from it. And loved ones, in my family haven't survived from it. So I do recognize that it is something that is a powerful entity in itself. And I am in awe and respect, and I am humbled by it. However, from my perspective energetically, it is about connecting with it and integrating it and not being in fear of it, because ultimately it's here. Whether it comes into our reality or whether we experience it is on another level or another layer. But I send love and prayers to everyone right now who's been affected by it, who has lost a loved one, who is sick right now with it. It is not for wimps, we'll put it that way. And even the strongest have been, just so affected by it. So when I look at that in the field, there are those who have yet to experience it that will be experiencing it still. I do feel from one projection that this will come to a head. That's what's been coming through. What does that mean? What does that look like? It's based on our own ability to come into neutrality from what my guidance team has been sharing with me. So it has to do with us being able to stabilize our frequencies, to communicate with each other openly, and to utilize our abilities that we've now activated. So the more we can be responsible in our words, actions, thoughts, and deeds, in a state of coherence in our heart, what I'm being guided to go back into vulnerability. The less vulnerable we are, but we're showing up with an authentic vulnerability. So it's not that what that does is that increases our immunity, our ability to literally stabilize the frequencies of Corvid, to stabilize the frequencies of the toxic interaction with our environment. And I guess maybe I'll go into a different video on that one, because there is a lot of toxicity that's being pumped at us. I'm being guided back to pump the brakes, which is part of the reason many of us have been feeling like we're pumping the brakes, because it's like, whoa, okay, I'm ready to go. No, whoa. So we're stop, go. But sometimes that's a good thing, because it gives us that opportunity to stabilize and then go, stabilize and then go. And the more consistently we are in that space, the easier it is for us to access our higher human potential. Our higher human potential is more powerful than we recognize at this moment. Many of us, some of us know what that is, but okay. In love and light, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Wearing my There's No Place Like Home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. All right, much love.